Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I ordered alien documents of the deep web. The next day, my father tried to kill me. Okay, so I've never really been one to post on Reddit, but after what happened to me, I just have to share this. I'm still trying to piece it all together myself, and maybe someone here can help me understand what the hell is going on. Before I get into it, I should mention that I'm a 22-year-old guy living in a small town in the middle of nowhere. It's one of those places where everyone knows everyone else's business, or at least they think they do, but no one knew about this. So I've always been into weird stuff. UFOs, conspiracy theories, you name it. I know, it sounds crazy, but it's just a hobby of mine. One night, I was hanging out in my room, diving into the darker corners of the internet, when I stumbled across this forum on the deep web. It was dedicated to all things extraterrestrial. Most of it was the usual bullshit, but then I found this thread about alien documents. The guy who posted it claimed to have real documents, like government stuff that had been leaked. Supposedly, it was evidence of aliens living among us, or at least proof that they've been visiting Earth. I was skeptical, obviously, but the idea of it all just sucked me in. I know I should have just clicked away, but curiosity got the best of me. The guy was selling copies of the documents for a couple of Bitcoin. It was stupidly expensive, but I figured it'd be worth the read, even if it was fake. I placed the order, and the next morning, I got an email with a link to download the documents. I opened them up, and at first, it was just a bunch of gibberish, pages and pages of random symbols and numbers. But then, things got strange. Mixed in with all the nonsense were diagrams and photos. They were grainy and hard to make out, but they showed things I can't explain. Creatures, maybe? I'm not even sure if they were alive. There were also reports, debriefings, I guess, about interactions with these things. Most of it was heavily redacted, but the parts I could read were disturbing. Stuff about experiments, about communication attempts that went horribly wrong. And then there was this section on hybrids. Apparently, these creatures, or whatever they were, had been trying to mix their DNA with ours. The documents described failed experiments, the horrifying results of these failed experiments. One line said, "Subjects are unstable and pose a severe risk." I remember reading that over and over, thinking it was all some elaborate prank. Now, here's where it gets really messed up. After spending hours going through these documents, I needed a break. I left my room to grab some food, and that's when I noticed my dad acting off. He's usually a laid-back guy, but he was just standing in the kitchen, staring out the window. I asked if he was okay, and he turned to look at me with this blank expression, like he didn't even recognize me. "Just tired," he said, but his voice was flat, emotionless. I didn't think much of it at the time. We all have our days, right? I went back to my room, trying to shake the weird feeling. That night, I heard noises coming from downstairs, like something was being dragged across the floor. I thought it might be my dad, so I crept out of bed to check. The house was dark and silent, except for the occasional creak. I reached the top of the stairs and looked down. What I saw made my heart stop. My dad was standing at the bottom, looking up at me with the same empty expression, but in his hand, he held one of our kitchen knives. The blade glinted in the dim light, and I could see something dripping from it. My brain went into overdrive, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe he cut himself. maybe it was a misunderstanding. "Dad?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond, just stood there, breathing heavily. Then he started to move up the stairs, one slow step at a time. I backed up, my mind racing. Was this some kind of sick joke? Was he sleepwalking? I couldn't just stand there and find out. I ran back to my room, locking the door behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. I grabbed my phone and texted my best friend, Jake, telling him to call the cops. I didn't know what else to do. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. Meanwhile, my dad kept knocking on the door, each thud matching my heartbeat. I heard him say, "Let me in, son." But it wasn't his voice. It sounded deeper, twisted, like there was another person trying to speak through him. I was trapped in my room, feeling completely helpless, waiting for what felt like an eternity. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I heard sirens in the distance. When the police arrived, my dad was back in the kitchen, sitting at the table, staring blankly at the wall. The knife was gone, and there was no trace of whatever had been on it. The cops took him to the station for questioning, but they couldn't hold him for long. He didn't remember anything. He claimed he'd been asleep the whole time. I tried to explain what I saw, but they looked at me like I was the crazy one. Maybe I am, but I can't shake the feeling that what I found on the deep web is connected to what happened, and I'm terrified to find out what that connection is. After the cops took my dad, I sat in my room trying to process everything. I didn't sleep that night. How could I, after what happened? I kept replaying the whole thing in my mind, trying to find something, anything that made sense. My dad wasn't a violent person. He was the kind of guy who would catch spiders in the house and let them outside instead of squashing them. So why the hell was he standing there with a knife, looking like he didn't even know me? When morning came, I went downstairs. The kitchen was exactly how we'd left it. The cops had dusted for fingerprints, asked their questions, and left as if they didn't believe a word I said. My dad was home too, and was acting like nothing had happened. He was standing at the stove, cooking breakfast. The smell of bacon filled the air, but it made my stomach churn. "Morning," he said, looking over his shoulder at me with that same blank expression from the night before. It sent a shiver down my spine. Morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He put a plate in front of me and sat down, eating in silence. I kept glancing at him, trying to see any sign that he remembered what he'd done. I wanted to ask him, but something in my gut told me to wait, to play along, at least until I knew what was going on. I excused myself after breakfast and headed back to my room, locking the door behind me. I opened my laptop, determined to dive deeper into those documents. Maybe there was something I missed. I had to know what I'd gotten myself into. I scrolled through the files, squinting at the blurry photos and indecipherable text. It was slow going, but I started to notice a pattern. Among the documents were references to something called the unveiling. It was mentioned several times, always in the context of blending or integration. I wasn't sure what it meant, but it seemed important. Maybe it was connected to the hybrids the documents mentioned. My thoughts were interrupted by a notification on my laptop. It was a message from Jake. He wanted to know what happened with my dad. I told him everything, leaving out the part about the documents for now. It sounded too crazy to say out loud, even to my best friend. He was concerned, obviously, and offered to let me crash at his place for a while. I considered it, but something told me I needed to stay, to figure out what was going on with my dad. The rest of the day passed in a blur. My dad was around, acting completely normal. I kept my distance, pretending to be busy with schoolwork. But when night fell, the tension in the house grew thicker. I locked my door again, shoving a chair under the handle for good measure. I couldn't risk a repeat of last night. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke up to a tapping sound. My heart raced as I glanced around the room, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It took me a moment to realize it was my window. Someone was outside, tapping on the glass. I crept closer, squinting through the darkness. It was Jake. Relief flooded through me, and I unlocked the window, helping him climb in. He'd snuck over to check on me, worried after I went radio silent. I was grateful to see him, but I knew he wasn't ready to hear the full story. I hadn't even wrapped my head around it yet. "What's going on, man?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. I hesitated, then decided to show him the documents. Maybe he could help me make sense of them. As he skimmed through the files, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. He looked at me, eyes wide, but before he could say anything, we heard footsteps in the hallway. My dad was awake. We froze, listening as the footsteps grew louder, stopping right outside my door. I held my breath, praying he'd go away, but the doorknob rattled, and then there was a soft, insistent knocking. "Open the door, son," he said, his voice a chilling echo of the night before. I motioned for Jake to stay quiet, inching toward the door. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to fling the door open, to confront him and demand answers, but fear held me back. The knocking continued for what felt like hours, but eventually it stopped. We heard him shuffle back down the hallway, and I let out a shaky breath. Jake was pale, his hands trembling as he set my laptop down. "Dude, what the hell is going on?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I shook my head, feeling more lost than ever. All I knew was that those documents had triggered something that wasn't just affecting my dad. I felt like I was in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Jake stayed over that night. We didn't get much sleep, too on edge to relax. I kept thinking about those documents, about the talk of hybrids and the unveiling. I didn't know what it meant, but I had a sinking feeling that it was only the beginning. Whatever was happening to my dad, it was coming for me next, and I was terrified of what would happen when it did. The morning after Jake stayed over, I felt the heavy weight of dread in my stomach. It was a Monday, which meant I had to pretend everything was normal. I went through the motions of getting ready for work, trying to ignore the creeping fear that my dad was more than just a threat to himself. I found my dad in the kitchen, pouring coffee with the usual vacant look in his eyes. I forced myself to act normal, even though I could feel Jake watching him like a hawk. My dad didn't acknowledge Jake's presence, which was weird. He always made a point of joking around with him. "Everything okay, Dad?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He nodded, sipping his coffee. "Just tired, like I said." I shot a glance at Jake, who shrugged slightly, indicating he didn't know what to make of it either. We ate breakfast in silence, the tension in the room suffocating. As we finished, my dad stood and headed for the door, mumbling something about running errands. After he left, Jake and I sat at the table, staring at the empty space where my dad had been. I finally told Jake everything about the deep web, the documents, the hybrids, and the references to the unveiling. I expected him to laugh it off, but instead, he listened intently, occasionally nodding. "This is serious, man," Jake said. "I mean, I don't know if I believe in aliens and all that, but something weird is definitely going on." We decided it was time to dig deeper. I pulled out my laptop again, and we went through the documents with a fine-tooth comb. It wasn't easy. Most of the text was still a jumbled mess, but Jake noticed something I hadn't. In the diagrams, there were recurring symbols, some kind of alphabet or code that didn't match anything I'd seen before. Jake suggested posting them on some conspiracy forums to see if anyone could recognize them. It felt risky, but I didn't have any better ideas. So we uploaded a few images, carefully choosing ones that didn't seem too damning. I didn't want to attract the wrong kind of attention. We added a vague explanation, claiming they were from an old, forgotten project. While we waited for responses, we decided to head into town. I needed to clear my head, and Jake was dying for some fresh air. After our night of paranoia, we left the house, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we drove through the town, things felt off. It was like everyone had a shadow cast over them, just going about their day like zombies. People I'd known my whole life didn't even acknowledge me. It was eerie, like they were all acting under the same spell that had overtaken my dad. We stopped at a small diner for lunch, needing a break from the oppressive atmosphere. While we waited for our food, Jake brought up the documents again. "What if it's some kind of, I don't know, a signal or something?" he suggested. "Like, what if it's doing something to people's minds?" That thought made my skin crawl. If the documents were some kind of alien tech, maybe there was more to them than I realized. Maybe they were dangerous. After lunch, we headed back to my place, hoping there'd be something on the forums. When we got there, we found a bunch of replies. Most were useless, or just plain crazy, but one caught my attention. It was from an anonymous user who claimed to be a former government employee. They wrote about a project called the Hybrid Initiative. According to them, it was a top-secret program aimed at creating a bridge between humans and extraterrestrials. The goal was to produce beings capable of blending in with human society, but possessing alien abilities. The user claimed these beings were unstable, prone to violent behavior, and mental instability. My blood ran cold as I read their warnings, their description matching the behavior my dad had been displaying. Could he be one of these hybrids? Was he changing? I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fit together. Jake and I discussed what we should do next. We couldn't go to the cops. They already thought I was nuts. I didn't want to risk my dad getting locked up in some government facility either. We had to handle this ourselves. That night, I decided to confront my dad. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by hiding in my room. Jake agreed to stay in case things went south. As evening approached, my dad came home, looking more exhausted than ever. His movements were slow and deliberate, like he was struggling to stay in control. I watched him carefully, trying to gauge his state of mind. After dinner, I followed him into the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. He sat on the couch, flipping through channels with disinterest. "Dad, we need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. He glanced at me, his eyes dull and distant. "About what?" "About what happened the other night, and the way you've been acting since." His hand paused on the remote, but he didn't look at me. "I don't know what you're talking about. You tried to hurt me," I said, my voice rising slightly. "And you don't even remember it." He was silent for a long moment, and I almost thought he was ignoring me. But then he turned to face me, his expression conflicted. "I've been having dreams," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "They don't feel like dreams, more like memories, but they're not mine." "What kind of memories?" I pressed, feeling a flicker of hope. "Of places I've never been, things I've never done, strange things." He rubbed his temples as if trying to ease a headache. "I see faces, hear voices. I can't make sense of it." "Do you remember anything from the other night?" I asked. He shook his head, his brow furrowing. "Just flashes. I don't know if they're real." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was relieved he was opening up, but I was still terrified. What if he snapped again? Jake came into the room, sensing the tension. He sat down beside me, offering silent support. My dad's gaze shifted to him, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Who's he?" my dad asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "It's Jake, Dad," I said, my heart sinking. For a moment, my dad just stared at him, as if he was trying to place him. Then he nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. "I'm sorry, son," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know what's happening to me." We spent the rest of the night talking, piecing together what little we could. My dad didn't remember much, but he did recall seeing strange lights in the sky a few nights before he changed. It was enough to convince me that whatever was happening to him, it wasn't natural. I went to bed that night, feeling a mix of relief and fear. I was glad my dad was aware, but I had no idea how to fix this. If the documents were connected, I needed to find a way to reverse whatever had been done to him. The only problem was, I didn't know where to start. Tomorrow, I'd have to dig deeper into the documents and the strange symbols within them, and I'd need to be prepared for whatever darkness lay ahead. The next morning, I woke up to find a note from Jake saying he had to go home and grab some stuff, but would be back later. I was alone in the house, which both relieved and terrified me. I needed to focus on the documents, but I was worried about what I might find. I spent the morning poring over the documents, this time focusing on the symbols and codes. They were unlike any language I'd ever seen, but I was determined to crack it. I opened several tabs on my laptop, searching for anything that matched these symbols. Hours passed, and I was getting nowhere. Frustration and exhaustion were setting in. Then, as if by some stroke of luck, I stumbled upon a forum post from years ago. The user had uploaded an image of a similar symbol, claiming it was a part of an ancient language called the script of the visitors. They didn't offer much context, but there was a link to a translation guide. I followed the link, and sure enough, there was a document attempting to decipher the script. It was incomplete and filled with gaps, but it was the best lead I had. I printed it out and spent the next several hours painstakingly comparing it to the symbols in my documents. Piece by piece, I began to unravel the message. It was slow work, but the more I translated, the clearer the picture became. The documents described a covert operation carried out decades ago. Governments had allegedly been in contact with an extraterrestrial species, and they reached an agreement. Humans would allow them to conduct experiments on Earth, and in return, the aliens would share advanced technology. The most chilling part was the mention of something called Project Integration. The goal was to create hybrids, creatures that were both human and alien. According to the documents, these hybrids were meant to be sleepers, agents who could live among humans, undetected until they were activated for a purpose not yet revealed. My heart pounded as I realized what this meant. Was my dad one of these hybrids? Had he been activated? The thought was both terrifying and surreal. I needed a break, so I stepped outside for some air. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the neighborhood. It should have been comforting, but instead, it felt ominous. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jake, telling me he'd be back soon. I felt a wave of relief. At least I wouldn't be alone with these thoughts much longer. As I stood there, I noticed something strange across the street. Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, was standing in her yard staring at me. Her expression was blank, her eyes unblinking. I tried to wave, but she didn't respond. It was like she was in a trance. Feeling uneasy, I went back inside and locked the door. The documents lay scattered across the table, their secrets partially revealed, but still out of reach. I had to know more. I needed to understand what was happening to my dad, and maybe even the whole town. While I waited for Jake, I decided to explore one of the remaining documents. This one was different, less about the experiments, and more about something called the beacon. It described a signal, a trigger that would activate the hybrids. My pulse quickened as I realized this might be what had caused my dad's strange behavior. The document warned that once activated, the hybrids would become extremely volatile. They'd exhibit violent tendencies, and their bodies might start to reject the alien DNA, leading to physical and mental deterioration. The document didn't mention how to stop it, but there were references to a counter signal. I made a note to investigate that later. Just then, the doorbell rang. I jumped, my nerves frayed from the day's discoveries. I hurried to the door, expecting Jake, but instead, I found a man I didn't recognize. He was tall and thin, with sunken eyes and an unsettling smile. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping the door partially closed. "Evening," he said, his voice smooth, but oddly hollow. "I'm from the neighborhood watch. We've noticed some unusual activity in the area, and I wanted to make sure everything is okay here." I nodded slowly, my instincts screaming that something was off. "Everything's fine," I replied, trying to sound convincing. "Just being busy with some work." His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good to hear. If you notice anything strange, don't hesitate to let us know." I watched him leave, feeling uneasy. There was something about him that didn't sit right. I closed the door and locked it, feeling trapped in my own home. When Jake finally arrived, I filled him in on everything I'd discovered. He listened intently, his face growing paler by the minute. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, glancing at the scattered documents. "We need to find that counter signal," I said. "It might be the only way to reverse what's happening to my dad." Jake nodded, determination in his eyes. "Let's do it." Together, we dove back into the documents, searching for any hint of how to create or find this counter signal. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but we had no other choice. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. If my dad was truly a hybrid, we had no idea how long it would be before the alien DNA took over completely. And what would happen to the town if there were more hybrids, more people being activated by this signal? We worked late into the night, fueled by adrenaline and fear. Every sound made us jump. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. But we pressed on, knowing that whatever horrors lay ahead, we had to face them together. We finally found a reference to the counter signal. buried deep within the files. It was described as a specific frequency that could disrupt the alien DNA, forcing it into a dormant state. The only problem was we had no idea how to generate it. I sat back, rubbing my eyes and feeling the weight of exhaustion. Jake was flipping through pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There has to be something," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Maybe we can figure out how to reverse engineer it." We decided to call it a night, our brains fried from the day's revelations. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the verge of something huge, something that could change everything. Tomorrow, we tackled the problem of the countersignal. We had no idea what we were up against, but one thing was certain: we couldn't let the hybrids win, not when the stakes were this high. The next morning, Jake and I hit the ground running. We had a single mission: figure out how to create the countersignal and use it to save my dad, and possibly the entire town. The more I thought about it, the more I realized we didn't have a lot of time. The documents mentioned using radio equipment to broadcast the countersignal, but it was all technical jargon, way over my head. Jake suggested we reach out to someone who might know more, and I remembered Mr. Collins, my old high school physics teacher. He was a bit of a conspiracy nut himself, and might be open to helping us. I gave him a call, explaining we needed help with a project involving radio frequencies. I left out the alien part for now, not wanting to scare him off. He agreed to meet us at the school later that afternoon, and we spent the rest of the day gathering the equipment we needed. As the day went on, things in town seemed to grow stranger. I couldn't shake the feeling that more people were acting like my dad, distant, hollow, as if something had drained the life out of them. I caught glimpses of my neighbors standing in their yards, staring blankly into space, just like Mrs. Henderson had. It was as if the whole town was slipping into some kind of trance. When we arrived at the school, Mr. Collins was already waiting for us in the science lab. He was older than I remembered, with gray hair and a weary look in his eyes, but his enthusiasm for anything scientific hadn't waned. "What's this all about?" he asked as we set up the equipment. "You've got my curiosity piqued." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "We're trying to generate a specific frequency," I said carefully. "We think it might help with a signal interference problem." He raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "All right, let's see what you've got." With his help, we began piecing together the equipment, adjusting the settings to match the frequency described in the documents. As we worked, I couldn't help but notice the way Mr. Collins's hands trembled slightly, as if he was nervous or on edge, but he didn't mention it, and I didn't ask. After a couple of hours of trial and error, we finally managed to set the equipment to the correct frequency. My heart raced as we prepared to broadcast the countersignal. I had no idea if it would work, but we had to try. "Here goes nothing," Jake said, flipping the switch. The machine hummed to life, emitting a low, vibrating sound that filled the room. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen. At first, there was nothing, just the steady thrum of the machine. But then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Mr. Collins staggered backward, clutching his head. "What's happening?" he gasped, his voice strained. "Are you okay?" I asked, rushing to his side. I don't know," he stammered. "It's like there's something trying to claw its way out of my mind." Panic surged through me. Had we done something wrong? Was the countersignal having an unintended effect? But then, just as suddenly, Mr. Collins straightened. his expression clearing. "I'm all right," he said, his voice steady. "I think it worked." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. We still needed to see if it had any effect on my dad. We thanked Mr. Collins for his help, promising to explain more later, and hurried back home. As we approached the house, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. What if the signal didn't work? What if my dad was beyond saving? I found him in the living room, sitting on the couch with that same vacant stare. My heart ached at the sight. "Dad," I said softly, hoping for a response. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, he blinked, as if coming out of a long sleep. His eyes focused on me, recognition dawning in their depths. "Son," he said, his voice hoarse. "What's going on?" I couldn't hold back the tears of relief. It had worked. He was back. We spent the next few hours explaining everything to him. He listened in disbelief, shaking his head at the sheer madness of it all. But he didn't doubt us, didn't question our story. He remembered the dreams, the strange thoughts that weren't his own, and he remembered the moment he had lost control. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't even know it was happening." "It wasn't your fault," I assured him, trying to keep my own voice steady. "We'll figure this out. We'll stop it." With the counter signal in place, we turned our attention to the town. If there were other hybrids out there, they'd need help too. We worked late into the night, planning how to spread the counter signal further to make sure it reached everyone who needed it. The next day, Jake and I drove around town, broadcasting the counter signal from his car. It was a risky move, but we didn't have a choice. We needed to reach as many people as possible to stop whatever was happening before it was too late. As the day wore on, we started seeing changes. People who had been distant and unresponsive began to perk up, their eyes clearing, their expressions softening. It was like watching them wake from a long, terrible dream. But not everyone was saved. Some remained lost, their minds too far gone to be brought back. It was a sobering reminder of how close we'd come to losing everything. In the weeks that followed, things slowly returned to normal. The town began to heal, the shadow of the hybrids fading into memory. My dad was back to his old self, the nightmares and strange thoughts gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of it. The document still haunted me, the knowledge that there were forces at work far beyond our understanding. We'd won this battle, but I knew the war was far from over. The hybrids, the aliens, the deep web, it was all still out there, waiting, and I had a feeling it would come for us again one day. But next time, we'd be ready. We'd faced the darkness and survived, and I knew we'd do it again if we had to. Because no matter what happened, we'd stand together, ready to fight for our future. As I lay in bed that night, exhausted but hopeful, I knew we'd taken the first step in a much larger journey, and whatever came next, we wouldn't face it alone. I found on the deep web that my parents aren't real human beings. Alright, so let me set the scene for you. I'm sitting in my dimly lit bedroom, staring at the glow of my laptop screen, trying to find something interesting to do with my time. It's a typical Friday night, and everyone I know is either out partying or binge watching the latest Netflix series. I, however, have always been drawn to the strange and unexplored corners of the internet. You know, the kind of stuff that normal people don't bother with. I'd heard about the deep web from some sketchy Reddit threads, and my curiosity had been piqued. I'd always been a bit of a tech geek, so the thought of diving into the hidden layers of the web intrigued me. After setting up a VPN and downloading Tor, I felt like I was ready to embark on this digital adventure. My heart was pounding with a mix of excitement and apprehension as I opened the Tor browser and began my descent into the unknown. At first, it was mostly what I expected: weird forums, marketplaces selling God knows what, and a ton of conspiracy theories. It was fascinating and terrifying all at once. As I kept browsing, I stumbled upon a forum titled Unseen Truths, which boasted about sharing the darkest secrets of humanity. I clicked on it, my fingers trembling slightly with anticipation. The forum was a chaotic mix of topics, ranging from government cover-ups to alien encounters. But one thread caught my attention: the inhuman among us. The thread was filled with bizarre claims about people living among us who weren't human. Most of the posts were pure nonsense, with people describing neighbors who never aged or co-workers with odd habits. But one post stood out from the rest. It was from a user named Watcher in the Dark, who claimed to have proof of these inhuman entities. The post was long and detailed, describing how to identify these beings with a warning: they look like us, but they're not us. I rolled my eyes, thinking it was just some conspiracy nuts fantasy. But then I saw a link at the bottom of the post. Click here for more. Without really thinking it through, I clicked on it. The screen went black for a moment before revealing a hidden section of the forum. It contained several folders, each named after mundane things like work, friends, and family. One folder in particular caught my eye: home. I hesitated for a second, my heart beating faster. Then I clicked it. Inside were dozens of files, but one video file stood out. It was titled Proof, MP4. I clicked on it, my curiosity overwhelming any sense of caution. The video was grainy and dark, like it had been filmed on an old camcorder. It showed a family sitting around a dining table, laughing and chatting. Everything seemed normal until the camera zoomed in on the parents' faces. My heart stopped. Their eyes were black, completely devoid of whites or pupils, like two endless voids staring into nothingness. I froze, unable to look away. The video continued, showing the parents moving in ways that were subtly wrong. Their movements were too fluid, too deliberate, like they were mimicking human behavior rather than living it. The video ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the screen in horrified silence. I tried to rationalize what I had just seen, telling myself it was some sort of prank or special effects trick. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off about my own parents. They had always been a bit strange, with their unwavering routines and odd mannerisms. I decided to do some digging. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to them, observing their every move. I noticed things I hadn't before, like how they never seemed to sleep, or how they avoided direct sunlight. And their eyes. God, their eyes. Sometimes, just for a split second, I could swear they looked darker than they should. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard voices coming from downstairs. It was my parents, talking in hushed tones. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept down the stairs, careful not to make a sound. As I got closer, their words became clearer, and my blood ran cold. They were discussing me. "We need to be careful. He's getting suspicious," my dad's voice said, calm and emotionless. My mom replied, "I know, but we can't let him find out what we really are." I backed away slowly, my mind racing. What the hell were they talking about? What did they mean by what we really are? I spent the rest of the night wide awake, trying to process everything. Was it possible? Could my parents be like the ones in the video? The thought was absurd, but I couldn't shake it. I needed to know the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. That's when I decided to delve deeper into the deep web, hoping to find more information about these inhuman beings. I became obsessed, spending every free moment scouring forums and piecing together fragments of information. The more I found, the more I realized how little I knew about the world and my own family. I know what you're thinking. This sounds like the plot of some crappy horror movie, right? Believe me, I wish it was. But this was my reality, and I was about to uncover a truth that would change everything I thought I knew. I spent the next few days on edge, my mind swirling with paranoia and fear. I avoided my parents as much as possible, making up excuses to stay in my room or leave the house. Every time I caught a glimpse of them, my heart pounded with anxiety. I knew I had to find out what was going on. The deep web was my only lead, and it was time to dive deeper, no matter how dangerous it felt. I set up my laptop in the darkest corner of my room, ensuring my door was locked. The glow of the screen was the only light source, casting eerie shadows that seemed to flicker and dance. I logged onto the hidden forum again, my hands shaking slightly with a mix of fear and determination. I returned to the thread where I first found the video, scrolling through the endless comments and links. One post mentioned a hidden chat room called The Veil, where people claimed to discuss encounters with these inhuman entities. It took some digging, but I finally found an invite link buried in a thread full of conspiracy theories and cryptic messages. The chat room was unlike anything I had seen before. It was a chaotic mix of fear-mongering and genuine terror, with users sharing stories of encounters with beings who wore human skin like a disguise. Some people were frantic, pleading for advice on how to handle their suspicions about friends and family. Others shared blurry photos and distorted audio recordings, desperate for validation. I felt a chill run down my spine as I scrolled through the messages. This wasn't just some internet hoax. These people truly believed they had encountered something otherworldly and dangerous. I posted a message of my own, describing the video I had seen and my suspicions about my parents. Almost immediately, I received a private message from someone with the username Seeker42. Their profile was empty, with no posts or personal information. The message read, "I've been watching your thread. I can help you, but you need to be careful. They're always watching." I hesitated, unsure if I should trust this anonymous stranger, but something about their message struck a chord with me. I replied, asking for more information. The response came quickly. "There are signs to look for. They mimic us, but they can't replicate everything. Look for inconsistencies, things that don't make sense, and whatever you do, don't confront them directly." I asked what they meant by inconsistencies, and Seeker42 explained that these entities often struggled with emotions and subtle human behaviors. They might respond inappropriately or seem overly rigid in their routines. They also mentioned that these beings sometimes communicated with each other in a language that was nearly imperceptible to human ears, a series of clicks and hums that could drive a person insane if they listened for too long. The conversation sent a shiver down my spine. Could this really be happening? Was there a chance my parents were something other than human? The idea was terrifying, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Seeker 42 was telling the truth. Over the next few days, I watched my parents even more closely, noting every strange behavior and odd reaction. My mom often seemed confused by simple questions, her responses feeling rehearsed. My dad's movements were too precise, too calculated, as if he were constantly aware of every inch of his body. And then there were the nights. I often heard them talking in the middle of the night, their voices low and urgent. One night, I decided to record their conversation using my phone. I slipped it under the door and hit record, my heart racing. After an hour or so, I retrieved the phone and listened to the playback. What I heard was unlike anything I could have imagined. It started with normal conversation, but slowly shifted into something else entirely. Their voices became distorted, the words turning into an unrecognizable string of clicks and low-frequency hums. It was unsettling, like listening to an alien language. I tried to play it off as interference or a recording error, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. My stomach churned with fear and disbelief. I needed more evidence, something concrete to prove that I wasn't going crazy. The following day, I decided to test them. At breakfast, I casually mentioned a friend from school who didn't exist, just to see their reaction. My mom smiled and nodded, acting as if she remembered this fictional person, but her eyes seemed vacant, like she was performing a role rather than genuinely engaging with me. My dad, on the other hand, hesitated. It was a split-second pause, but it was enough to send my heart racing. He quickly covered it up, laughing and asking me how this non-existent friend was doing. But I could see it, the crack in their facade. That night, I contacted Seeker 42 again, desperate for guidance. They responded with a warning. You're getting too close. They might know you suspect something. Be careful. The moment they realize you know the truth, you're in danger. My blood ran cold at the thought. Was I putting myself at risk by digging too deep? But I couldn't stop now. I needed to know the truth, even if it meant facing the horrifying reality of what my parents might be. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, felt like a threat. The darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating and oppressive. I couldn't help but wonder, if my parents weren't human, what were they planning to do with me? I woke up the next morning with a sinking feeling in my gut. The paranoia was consuming me, and I knew I had to do something drastic if I wanted to get to the bottom of this nightmare. My parents were acting stranger than ever, their interactions with me feeling like a poorly rehearsed play. I was convinced that if I didn't find out the truth soon, something terrible would happen. With the memory of the disturbing audio recording fresh in my mind, I decided it was time to investigate further. If my parents were really some kind of inhuman entities, there had to be physical evidence somewhere in the house. I planned to search for anything unusual when they left for work. They always followed a strict schedule, leaving the house at 8 a.m. and returning at precisely 6 p.m. It was my only window of opportunity. I waited anxiously until they left, watching from the window as their car disappeared down the street. Once I was sure they were gone, I began my search. My heart pounded in my chest as I methodically checked each room, starting with the attic. I sifted through boxes of old clothes, family photos, and dusty knickknacks, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Next, I moved on to their bedroom. I rummaged through their closet and dresser drawers, looking for anything that might seem out of place. As I was about to give up, something caught my eye. A small metal box hidden under a loose floorboard in the corner of the room. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and opened it. Inside, I found a collection of strange items, an old leather-bound notebook, several small vials of an unknown liquid, and a collection of black and white photographs. The photos were the most disturbing. They showed my parents standing with other people, all with those same black, soulless eyes from the video I'd seen on the deep web. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I flipped through the images, my mind racing with the implications. I picked up the notebook, hoping it would provide some answers. It was filled with handwritten notes in a language I didn't recognize, an odd mix of symbols and glyphs that made my head hurt just looking at them. The few pages I could decipher seemed to be some sort of journal entries describing experiments and observations on human behavior. One entry in particular caught my attention. It detailed a plan to integrate into human society, to observe and learn from us while maintaining their true identities. It talked about something called the transition, a phase where these beings could fully adapt and blend in without detection. My heart sank as I realized this wasn't just some isolated incident. This was part of a larger, more sinister scheme. As I sat there, trying to make sense of everything, I heard a noise downstairs. Panic surged through me as I quickly put everything back in the box and returned it to its hiding spot. My parents weren't supposed to be back for hours. What if they knew I was onto them? I had to get out of there. I quietly crept downstairs, my heart thundering in my chest. But as I reached the bottom step, I realized the noise wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the basement. The door was slightly ajar, a faint glow spilling out from the cracks. My instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away as possible, but I knew I couldn't leave without knowing the full truth. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead, and slowly pushed the door open. The creaking of the hinges echoed ominously as I descended into the dimly lit basement. The room was filled with a strange humming sound, and the air was thick with an acrid smell that made my eyes water. As I reached the bottom step, I froze, my eyes widening in horror. In the center of the room was a large metal table, and lying on it was what appeared to be a lifeless human body. Tubes and wires protruded from its skin, connecting it to a series of machines that whirred and beeped. The sight was grotesque, like something out of a twisted sci-fi movie. But what truly terrified me was the realization that the body on the table looked exactly like me. I stumbled backward, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. My head spun with questions and fear. Was this some kind of clone? A backup in case something happened to the real me? The implications were terrifying. I turned to leave, but something caught my eye in the corner of the room. A small monitor displaying security footage of the house. The living room, kitchen, even my bedroom. They had been watching me, studying my every move. A sense of dread settled over me as I realized there was no escaping this nightmare. My parents, or whatever they were, had been planning something all along. I needed to get out of there before they returned, and found out I had discovered their secret. As I made my way back upstairs, I heard the front door open and close. My blood turned to ice. They were back early. I quickly hid in a closet, trying to quiet my ragged breathing as I listened to their footsteps approaching. "We have to move fast," my mom's voice said, her tone devoid of the usual warmth. "He's getting too close." I peeked through the slats of the closet door, my heart pounding, as I watched them walk past. Their eyes were different now, darker and more menacing. I knew in that moment that I was in grave danger. Once they disappeared into the basement, I seized the opportunity to escape. I crept out of the closet and made a beeline for the front door, my heart racing with adrenaline. I knew I had to leave everything behind, my phone, my laptop, anything they could use to track me. As I stepped out into the cool night air, a sense of both relief and terror washed over me. I had escaped for now, but I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever my parents truly were, they wouldn't stop until they found me. And the thought of what they might do if they caught me sent a shiver down my spine. I ran for what felt like hours, my heart pounding in my chest as the chilling revelation about my parents sunk in. I didn't stop until I was deep in the woods behind our house, surrounded by towering trees and enveloped in darkness. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to calm myself, my mind racing with questions and fear. What were my parents planning? And why did they have a copy of me lying on a table like some sick science experiment? The thought made my skin crawl, and I knew I couldn't let them catch me. I needed help, but who could I trust? With no phone or way to contact anyone, I decided to head to the only place that felt remotely safe, my friend Jake's house. He lived a few miles away, and I knew the path through the woods well enough to navigate in the dark. I just hoped he'd believe me. The journey was a blur of rustling leaves and snapping branches, every sound magnified by the eerie silence of the night. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like eyes were tracking my every move. My mind kept conjuring images of those dark, soulless eyes from the video, making my skin prickle with unease. Finally, I reached Jake's house. Breathless and exhausted, I pounded on his door, praying he was home. After what felt like an eternity, the porch light flicked on, and Jake opened the door, squinting at me in confusion. "Dude, what the hell?" "It's the middle of the night," he said, his voice tinged with sleepiness. I stumbled inside, trying to catch my breath as I explained everything. My discovery on the deep web, the strange behavior of my parents, and the horror I found in the basement. Jake listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern as I recounted the details. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I mean, it sounds insane." I nodded, my voice shaky. "I know it does, but I swear, Jake, something's not right. My parents aren't human. They've got this clone of me in the basement." Jake ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to process everything. Okay, let's think about this. What do we do now? We can't go to the cops. They'd never believe us. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling the weight of hopelessness settle over me. "But I can't go back there. I need to figure out what they are and why they're doing this." Jake suggested we do some research, see if we could find anything else about these beings online. He grabbed his laptop, and we started searching for anything that might give us answers. We spent hours sifting through forums, conspiracy sites, and dark web threads, piecing together what little information we could find. One recurring theme stood out. These entities, sometimes called skinwalkers or changelings, had been around for centuries, blending in with humans and studying us. They were rumored to be capable of mimicking human appearance and behavior, but they often struggled with emotions and social cues. The more we read, the more convinced we became that these were the same creatures masquerading as my parents. One post in particular caught our attention. It was from someone who claimed to have escaped from these beings, detailing how they planned to use their doubles to replace people, allowing them to infiltrate society undetected. The post ended with a chilling warning: trust no one. They will stop at nothing to achieve their goal. The gravity of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. I was in way over my head, dealing with forces beyond my comprehension. My mind raced with possibilities and fear, trying to come up with a plan to stop them. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, we decided we needed more evidence, something concrete to prove what was happening. Jake suggested we go back to my house and try to document everything on camera, gather proof that these things existed. The thought of returning to that house sent a wave of dread through me, but I knew it was the only way to expose the truth. I agreed, feeling a mix of fear and determination. We gathered some supplies, flashlights, a camera, and anything we might need to defend ourselves, and set out toward my house. The walk back was tense, the morning light doing little to ease the fear that clung to me like a second skin. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, my imagination conjuring images of those black-eyed beings lurking in the shadows. As we approached the house, I felt a growing sense of unease. Everything seemed too quiet, too still, like the calm before a storm. We crept around to the back, avoiding the front door in case my parents were inside. Jake and I slipped into the house through the back door, moving cautiously through the kitchen. The air was heavy with tension, each step echoing ominously in the silence. My heart pounded in my chest as we made our way toward the basement door. I gestured for Jake to stay behind me as I slowly pushed the door open, half expecting my parents to be waiting on the other side. But the basement was empty, the only sound the faint hum of machinery coming from the far corner. We descended the stairs, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. I led Jake to the table where I had seen the body, my heart sinking as I saw that it was now empty. Whatever had been there was gone, leaving no trace behind. Frustration and fear boiled inside me. I knew I hadn't imagined it, but without the evidence, I was back at square one. Jake started filming the room, documenting the strange equipment and the eerie atmosphere. Just as we were about to leave, Jake pointed to something on the floor, a small metallic object glinting in the beam of his flashlight. I picked it up, recognizing it as one of the vials from the box I had found in my parents' room. It was filled with a dark, viscous liquid that seemed to pulse with an unnatural glow. We had no idea what it was, but it felt important. It was proof that something was happening, even if we didn't fully understand it yet. We hurried out of the basement, my nerves fraying with each passing second. As we reached the main floor, we heard the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. Panic surged through me. My parents were back, and we had nowhere to hide. Jake and I exchanged a look of fear and determination. We knew we couldn't let them catch us, not after what we had seen. We sprinted for the back door, adrenaline propelling us forward. As we burst into the backyard, I glanced back and saw my parents standing in the doorway. Their eyes were darker than ever, filled with a cold, calculating menace that made my skin crawl. We kept running, not stopping until we reached the safety of the woods. Jake and I didn't stop running until we were deep in the woods, our breath ragged and our bodies aching from the effort. I leaned against a tree, trying to catch my breath, the vial of strange liquid clutched tightly in my hand. My mind was racing, 1,000 thoughts and fears clamoring for attention. We needed a plan, and we needed it fast. "Dude, What the hell are we gonna do now? Jake panted, looking around nervously as if expecting those inhuman creatures to materialize from the shadows at any moment. We have to figure out what this stuff is, I said, holding up the vial. Maybe it can help us understand what we're dealing with. Jake nodded, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. But how? We don't even know what we're looking for. I thought for a moment, then remembered something from our earlier research. There was a website we had come across, run by a group that claimed to have experience dealing with these creatures. They called themselves the Watchers, and while their site had been mostly filled with cryptic warnings and conspiracy theories, there had been a contact email. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. We made our way back to Jake's house, our nerves on edge the entire way. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me jump, expecting my parents, or whatever they were, to appear out of nowhere. Once inside, we locked all the doors and windows, drawing the curtains tight. Jake booted up his laptop, and I quickly typed out an email to the Watchers, detailing everything we had discovered and attaching photos of the vial and the notes I'd taken from the journal. I hit send, hoping against hope that someone would respond. Hours passed as we waited, the tension in the air growing thicker with each passing minute. We tried to distract ourselves, but every little sound made us jump. The fear of being discovered was like a weight on my chest, suffocating and relentless. Just when I was beginning to lose hope, an email notification pinged on Jake's laptop. I practically lunged for it, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The email was from the Watchers, and it was short but chilling. We've been monitoring your situation. You're in grave danger. The liquid is a catalyst for the transition. Meet us at the location below for more information. Come alone and trust no one. The email included coordinates for a location on the outskirts of town, a place I knew to be an abandoned warehouse. It was the last place I wanted to go, but what choice did I have? If these people could help me, I had to take the risk. Jake insisted on coming with me, despite the warnings to come alone. No way am I letting you face this by yourself, he said, his expression set with determination. I was grateful for his support, though fear gnawed at me as we made our way to the warehouse. The building loomed ominously in the twilight, its broken windows and crumbling facade a testament to years of neglect. We approached cautiously, my heart hammering in my chest. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. We found the Watchers waiting for us, a group of grim-faced individuals who looked like they'd seen their fair share of horrors. Their leader, a man named Harris, stepped forward, his expression a mix of urgency and concern. "You're brave to come here," he said, glancing around warily. "But you shouldn't have brought your friend. It's too dangerous." "I couldn't let him do this alone," Jake replied, standing firm. "We need to know what's going on." Harris nodded, acknowledging Jake's determination. "Very well. We don't have much time. They'll come for you once they realize you've contacted us." He explained that the creatures masquerading as my parents were part of a larger network of beings attempting to infiltrate human society. They used the transition to replace individuals with identical copies, creating sleeper agents who could be activated at any time. The liquid in the vial was a crucial component, enabling the clones to fully integrate and mimic human behavior. These beings have been operating in secret for centuries, Harris continued, his voice low. They're patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. But their numbers are growing, and they're becoming bolder. What can we do to stop them? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Harris hesitated, a shadow passing over his face. There's only one way to stop them. You have to destroy the original host. Once the source is gone, the clones can't survive. The thought of confronting my parents, my real parents, and ending their lives was almost too much to bear. But deep down, I knew they were gone, replaced by these inhuman creatures. Where do we start? Jake asked, his voice grim. We'll help you, Harris said, determination in his eyes. But you must act quickly. The longer you wait, the more danger you're in. With their guidance, we formulated a plan to lure my parents out, using the vial as bait. It was risky, but it was our only chance to stop them. I knew they would come for the liquid once they realized it was missing, and when they did, we would be ready. We returned to my house, setting up a trap in the basement where the horrors had first been revealed. My heart pounded in my chest as we prepared, every creak of the house amplifying my anxiety. As night fell, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It felt like the air itself was charged with malevolence, every shadow hiding unseen dangers. Jake and I hid in the basement, our breaths quiet and controlled as we waited. The sound of the front door opening sent a jolt of fear through me. My parents were home, and they would soon realize what we had done. I clutched the vial tightly, my hands shaking with anticipation. Footsteps echoed above us, deliberate and slow. My mind conjured images of those black eyes, soulless and cold, as they moved through the house. Jake and I exchanged a tense glance, bracing ourselves for what was to come. The basement door creaked open, and my parents descended the stairs. Their eyes were darker than I'd ever seen, their faces twisted into expressions of inhuman rage. They spoke in that strange guttural language, the sound sending chills down my spine. Harris and his team moved into action, confronting the creatures with a mixture of weapons and tactics designed to disrupt their control. The confrontation was intense, a blur of motion and sound that left my senses reeling. The fight was brutal, and just as it seemed we were gaining the upper hand, the creatures lashed out with desperate fury. But in the chaos, I managed to deliver the final blow, shattering the vial and releasing its contents onto my parents. A guttural scream filled the air, echoing off the walls as the liquid took effect. My parents' forms twisted and writhed, their flesh melting away to reveal the alien creatures beneath. It was horrifying, watching the transformation, but I couldn't look away. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun, the creatures dissolving into nothingness. Silence filled the basement, broken only by our ragged breathing. It was over. The nightmare that had consumed my life had come to an end, but at a terrible cost. The realization that my real parents had been gone long before I discovered the truth weighed heavily on my heart. Jake placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, offering silent support as I grappled with the enormity of what we had done. I knew I had saved countless others from falling victim to the same fate, but it was a hollow victory. As dawn broke, I stepped outside, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. The world seemed different now, filled with unseen dangers and hidden horrors. I had survived, but I would never be the same. Harris and the Watchers promised to keep an eye on me, ensuring no remnants of the creatures remained. They offered their resources and knowledge, a lifeline in a world that was no longer as safe as I had once believed. I thanked them for their help, knowing I couldn't have done it without them. Jake and I returned to his house, our minds heavy with the weight of everything we had been through. The ordeal had ended, but I knew the scars would remain. The truth I had uncovered was terrifying, a reminder that the world was full of mysteries and dangers lurking just beneath the surface. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. My parents might be gone, but there were others out there, waiting and watching. I knew I had to be vigilant, to stay alert for any signs of danger. The nightmare might be over for now, but the darkness was never far away. And as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I vowed to keep fighting, to protect the world from the horrors that hid in plain sight. I had survived, but the war was far from over. I ordered the alien pill of the deep web. They showed me the secret truth about time travel. I've always been fascinated by the unknown, the fringes of what we call reality. Ever since I was a kid, I was obsessed with conspiracy theories, the paranormal, and anything that promised a glimpse beyond the mundane. But it wasn't until I stumbled onto the deep web that things got out of hand. I was going through a rough patch in my life. My job sucked, my relationship was crumbling, and I felt trapped in a cycle of monotony. The deep web was an escape, a virtual rabbit hole that promised something more. That's when I found it. A forum post titled, "Alien Pills, See the Truth Behind Time." It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad sci-fi movie. But the poster claimed these pills would unlock parts of the human brain that would let you perceive time differently. It was supposedly extracted from some extraterrestrial substance, harvested from a crashed UFO or something equally insane. The kicker? The post had hundreds of replies, most of them testimonials from people claiming it worked. I was skeptical, but intrigued. The post had a link to an encrypted marketplace where you could buy the pills using cryptocurrency. It was expensive, but I had some savings and my curiosity got the better of me. I bought a small package just to see if there was anything to it. When the package arrived, it was nondescript, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Inside was a small vial containing 10 pills and a handwritten note. 1 pill per day, no more. Prepare to see the truth. I couldn't wait. I took the first pill that night. Nothing happened at first. I felt a little lightheaded, maybe slightly nauseous, but that was it. Disappointed, I went to bed thinking I'd been scammed. But then I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My body was paralyzed, but my mind was wide awake. And then I saw them, the shadows in my room. They weren't like normal shadows. They moved with a strange fluidity, shifting and changing shapes as they crept closer to my bed. I felt a pressure on my chest, like something was sitting on me, crushing the air out of my lungs. My vision started to blur, and I could hear whispers, faint, unintelligible voices echoing in my ears. I thought I was going to die right then and there. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The shadows receded, and I could breathe again. I lay there gasping for air, trying to convince myself it was just a bad dream, but it felt too real, too vivid. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Colors seemed brighter, sounds sharper. I chalked it up to lingering effects of the pill and tried to go about my day. But then I started seeing the glitches. That's the only way I can describe them. Moments where reality seemed to flicker, like a glitching video. People's faces would blur for a second, or the ground would ripple like water. I tried to ignore it, thinking I was just imagining things, but it kept happening, and each time it felt more real. By the third day, I was starting to freak out. I considered stopping the pills, but I was scared of what might happen if I did. Plus, part of me was curious to see how deep this rabbit hole went. On the fourth day, things got really weird. I was sitting in a coffee shop, trying to calm my nerves with a latte, when time stopped. Everything froze. People, cars, even the steam rising from my cup. I was the only one who could move. It was surreal, like stepping into a painting. Then out of nowhere, this figure appeared across the room. It was tall and slender, its skin a sickly gray. Its eyes were completely black, and it had this unnerving smile that sent chills down my spine. It didn't say anything, just stood there, watching me. And then it was gone, and time started moving again. I rushed out of there, heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't make sense of what I'd seen. I knew I needed answers, but I was terrified of what those answers might be. That night, I dreamt of the figure. It was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand the words. They were garbled, like a tape being played backward. I woke up in a panic, the room spinning around me. I knew I had to keep going, to see this through to the end. As I write this, I'm on the fifth pill. Each one takes me further from reality, showing me glimpses of a world that's both terrifying and fascinating. I don't know where this journey will end, or if I'll ever be the same again, but I'm in too deep now, and there's no turning back. I'll update you all soon. The fifth pill was unlike anything I'd experienced before. I took it early in the morning, hoping to avoid the weirdness in public. I wanted to be alone, somewhere I felt safe, if you could call my cramped apartment that. After swallowing the pill, I sat on my couch, waiting for the effects to kick in. It hit me faster this time. One moment, I was staring at my TV, trying to focus on a show to keep my mind occupied, and the next, I was somewhere else entirely. It was like I blinked, and suddenly I was standing in a field under a sky that seemed too close, the clouds hanging ominously low. The air smelled metallic, almost like blood, and there was a faint hum, a vibration that pulsed through the ground. I looked around and realized I wasn't alone. There were others, shadowy figures scattered across the field, all facing a giant monolith in the center. The monolith was unlike anything I had seen before, smooth and black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Symbols covered its surface, constantly shifting and changing, like they were alive. The figures turned toward me, and I could see their faces were just voids, empty and dark. They didn't have eyes, but I could feel them watching me. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped inside my throat. The figures began to chant in a language that I couldn't understand, but it resonated deep within me, stirring something primal and ancient. I felt drawn to the monolith, compelled to move closer, even though every instinct screamed to run away. As I stepped forward, the ground beneath me seemed to ripple, the grass turning into a sea of black liquid. Suddenly, the scene shifted, and I was back in my apartment. My heart was racing, my shirt soaked with sweat. I checked the time and saw that only a few minutes had passed, even though it felt like hours. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. I had no idea what was happening to me, or if I was losing my grip on reality. Determined to find some answers, I started researching online, digging through forums and obscure websites. I found more stories like mine, people who claimed to have taken the alien pills. Most of them sounded like lunatics, rambling about parallel worlds and hidden dimensions, but a few seemed credible, and their experiences were eerily similar to mine. They talked about seeing the same monolith, encountering those faceless figures, and being pulled into visions of other worlds. But they also mentioned something else, an entity that communicated with them through these visions. They called it the Keeper. The Keeper was supposedly an ancient being, a guardian of time and reality. It used the monolith to show people the truth, but it demanded something in return. Those who ignored its warnings were never seen again, lost to the void between worlds. I was starting to think I was in over my head, but I was also too deep to stop. I needed to know more, to understand what was happening to me and why. Against my better judgment, I decided to take another pill, hoping it would bring me closer to the truth. The next morning, I downed the 6th pill and braced myself for whatever was coming. This time, the effects were almost immediate. The room warped around me, walls melting away as I was transported back to the field with the monolith. The figures were waiting for me, their chanting growing louder. The ground trembled beneath me as I approached the monolith, feeling its pull even stronger. The symbols on its surface seemed to call to me, and I reached out to touch them. The moment my fingers brushed the monolith, I was overwhelmed by a flood of images and sensations. I saw cities rising and falling, people living and dying, entire worlds being born and destroyed. It was like watching the history of the universe unfold before my eyes. Then everything stopped, and I was face to face with the Keeper. It was more terrifying than I could have imagined. A towering figure of darkness with eyes like burning coals. It spoke without words, communicating directly into my mind. The truth comes at a price, it said. Are you willing to pay it? I didn't know what it meant, but I was too mesmerized to care. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of acceptance. Whatever the cost, I needed to see this through. The Keeper reached out, touching my forehead with a finger as cold as ice. I felt a sharp pain, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was back in my apartment, gasping for air. My head was pounding, and I felt an unfamiliar presence lurking in the back of my mind, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I had crossed a line, entered a realm I didn't fully understand, but there was no turning back now. Whatever the Keeper had shown me, whatever price I had to pay, I was committed. The truth was out there, and I was determined to find it. After my encounter with the Keeper, things took a turn for the worse. My life was spiraling into chaos. The visions from the pills had become more intense, bleeding into my waking hours. I'd see flickers of alternate realities overlaid on top of this one, different versions of my apartment, my neighborhood, even myself. It was like watching TV channels constantly changing, and I couldn't turn it off. The presence in my mind was growing stronger too. It whispered to me in moments of silence, filling my head with incomprehensible phrases and cryptic warnings. I was starting to lose track of time, unsure of what was real and what was just another hallucination. By the 7th pill, I had stopped caring about the consequences. I was obsessed with the truth, consumed by the need to understand what lay beyond the veil of our reality. I knew I was putting myself in danger, but the knowledge that there was something more, something greater, was too enticing. I took the 7th pill on a Sunday evening, sitting in the darkness of my living room. My surroundings shifted almost immediately, the walls dissolving into a swirling vortex of colors and sounds. I felt like I was falling, tumbling through space without any sense of direction. I landed in a place that was simultaneously familiar and alien. It was a city, but not like any city I'd ever seen. The buildings were twisted, towering structures of glass and metal that seemed to defy gravity. The sky was a sickly green, casting an eerie glow over everything. People moved through the streets, but they weren't normal people. Their faces were distorted, features melting and shifting as they walked. Their eyes were empty, soulless, as if they were puppets being controlled by some unseen force. I wandered through the city, drawn by an inexplicable urge to explore. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and a constant hum vibrated through the ground. As I walked, the whispers in my mind grew louder, echoing off the walls of the skyscrapers. Then I saw him. Standing at the end of a deserted street was the keeper, its eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. It beckoned to me, and I felt an overwhelming compulsion to follow. As I approached, the city around us began to crumble, the buildings collapsing into dust. The ground shook violently, and I struggled to keep my balance. But the keeper remained steady, its presence commanding and unyielding. "You seek the truth," it said, its voice reverberating inside my skull. "But can you handle it?" I didn't know how to respond. I was terrified, but I couldn't back down now. I nodded, unable to find my voice. The keeper reached out again, placing its hand on my chest. A surge of energy shot through me, and I was filled with visions once more. But this time, they were different. They were memories, my memories, but not my own. I saw myself as a child, growing up in different places, living different lives. I experienced moments of joy and pain, triumph and failure, all unfolding simultaneously. Then the memories changed. I saw events that hadn't happened yet, glimpses of a future that seemed inevitable. I saw myself growing old, alone and broken, haunted by the choices I'd made. I saw the world ending in fire and darkness, consumed by forces beyond our control. And through it all, the keeper watched, its expression inscrutable. "Time is a circle," it whispered. "Everything that has happened will happen again." I pulled away, gasping for air. The visions faded, and I was back in my living room, the shadows lengthening as night fell. My heart was racing, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I knew that what I had seen was more than just a hallucination. It was a warning. I needed to stop. The pills, the visions, the quest for truth. It was all leading me down a path I couldn't come back from, but the presence in my mind wouldn't let me rest. It urged me to continue, to keep pushing forward, to see what lay beyond the horizon. Desperate for answers, I turned to the one person I thought could help, my friend Mark, a conspiracy theorist and paranormal researcher who'd been diving into the deep web long before I ever had. I called him, my voice trembling as I recounted everything that had happened. Mark was intrigued, but cautious. He warned me about the dangers of meddling with forces we didn't understand, but he agreed to meet up and help me find more information. We arranged to meet at a secluded cabin he owned, away from the prying eyes of the city. As I packed my things, I felt a growing sense of unease. The keeper's warning echoed in my mind, and the presence inside me felt restless, agitated. I knew I was walking into something far bigger than I could handle, but I couldn't turn back now. I drove to Mark's cabin with a knot in my stomach, my mind racing with questions and fears. The road twisted through dense woods, and the oppressive darkness pressed in on me from all sides. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound a whisper from the lurking presence that had taken residence in my mind. When I finally reached the cabin, it was just as Mark had described. isolated and weather-beaten, surrounded by towering trees that blocked out the sky. Mark was waiting for me. On the porch, his expression tense but welcoming. He waved me inside, and I could see he'd already set up a makeshift research station. Papers, maps, and a laptop covered the table. "Damn, man," Mark said as I stepped inside. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "More like a whole parade of them," I replied, trying to muster a smile. We settled into the chairs by the table, and I laid it all out for him. Every vision, every encounter with the Keeper, and the chilling feeling that something was closing in on me. Mark listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I've heard of these pills," he said when I finished. "There are stories, rumors about them being part of some government experiment or an ancient cult. People claim they unlock parts of the mind we're not supposed to access." "That explains the visions," I said, shivering at the memory of those distorted realities. "But what about the Keeper?" Mark tapped a few keys on his laptop, bringing up an old forum thread filled with accounts from people who'd had similar experiences. The Keeper shows up in a lot of these stories. Some think it's a guardian. Others believe it's a trickster leading people to their doom. "Great, just what I need," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "A cosmic prankster messing with my life." "But there's something else," Mark continued, lowering his voice. "These pills might not just show you the truth. They could be tearing holes in reality, letting things through that shouldn't be here." I felt a chill run down my spine. It made sense, in a twisted sort of way. The visions, the glitches in reality, they weren't just happening in my head. I was dragging something back with me every time I took a pill. "We need to figure out what the Keeper wants," Mark said, urgency in his voice. "If it's a guardian, maybe it's trying to warn you. But if it's a trickster, then it's using you as a pawn." We spent hours going through Mark's research, piecing together fragments of information from disparate sources. The deeper we delved, the more convinced I became that the Keeper wasn't just some figment of my imagination. It was a being that existed beyond the constraints of time and space, using the pills as a conduit to reach our world. Mark and I decided that I needed to confront the Keeper one more time, but this time I had to be prepared. We set up a space in the cabin where I could safely take the 8th pill, surrounded by protective symbols and artifacts Mark had collected over the years. As the time approached, I felt a gnawing anxiety settle over me. The presence in my mind was restless, churning with a mix of anticipation and fear. I swallowed the 8th pill, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead. The cabin around me dissolved, replaced by a void of swirling darkness. The air was cold, and the ground beneath me felt like solidified shadows. I was back in the city with the twisted skyscrapers, the distorted figures watching from the shadows. The Keeper stood before me, its eyes glowing with an intensity that pierced through the darkness. This time, its presence was more tangible, more real. I could feel its power radiating from it, a force that transcended everything I knew. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the void. "Why show me all of this?" The Keeper's eyes narrowed, and I felt its thoughts probing into my mind. "You seek the truth," it said, its voice a haunting melody that resonated in my bones. "But truth is a burden not easily borne." I struggled to hold its gaze, my mind reeling from the weight of its presence. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "End the cycle," the Keeper replied, its words tinged with urgency. "Break the chain of time, Only then will you find peace. The void around us began to ripple, and I felt myself being pulled away. The keeper's form flickered, its eyes burning brighter as it reached out one final time. Remember, everything is connected. Choose wisely. And then I was back in the cabin, gasping for breath. Mark was beside me, his face pale and drawn. "What happened?" he asked, gripping my shoulder. "I don't know," I said, shaking my head. "But the keeper wants me to end something, to break the chain of time." We sat in silence, the gravity of the keeper's words sinking in. I knew I couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding from the truth. Whatever the keeper wanted, it was up to me to find out how to stop it. The answer was out there, buried in the mysteries of the pills and the visions they conjured. I had to uncover the secrets hidden within the folds of reality, no matter the cost. The next morning, Mark and I made a plan. We needed to retrace the origins of the pills, find out who was behind their creation, and what purpose they truly served. We suspected that if we could uncover their source, we might figure out how to fulfill the Keeper's cryptic demand to end the cycle. Our search led us back to the deep web, scouring forums and obscure sites where rumors of the alien pills originated. After hours of combing through threads, we finally stumbled upon a lead, a user claiming to have information about the pills and their true nature. They called themselves the Watcher and promised to meet us in person, insisting it was the only way to share what they knew. It felt like a trap, but we had no other options. We arranged to meet the Watcher at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the town. It was the kind of place you'd expect to find in a horror movie, dark, foreboding, and reeking of decay. Mark and I arrived just before midnight, the air cold and biting. The warehouse loomed over us, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. We ventured inside, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The Watcher was waiting for us in a dimly lit corner, their face hidden by the hood of a long coat. "You came," the Watcher said, their voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think you'd have the courage." "We need answers," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "The pills, the Keeper, what's really going on?" The Watcher glanced around as if making sure we were alone. "The pills were never meant for humans," they began. "They were created by an ancient race, a species that mastered time travel and sought to control the flow of reality itself." My heart sank. I'd feared the truth would be something like this, but hearing it confirmed was chilling. "And the Keeper?" "The Keeper is a remnant of that race," the Watcher continued. "A guardian left behind to ensure their knowledge doesn't fall into the wrong hands. The pills open your mind to the truth, but they also tether you to the Keeper's will." Mark and I exchanged a glance, realization dawning on us. The pills weren't just showing me the truth. They were binding me to a purpose beyond my understanding. "Why me?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Why show me any of this?" "Because you have the potential to change things," the Watcher said, "to end the cycle that has trapped countless others before you. But to do that, you must destroy the source of the pills." "And where is that?" Mark asked, his voice filled with urgency. The Watcher hesitated, then handed me a crumpled piece of paper. "Here's the location. It's heavily guarded, and you'll only have one chance." I unfolded the paper, my eyes scanning the address written on it. It was a facility just outside the city, a nondescript building that housed untold secrets. I felt a sense of dread wash over me, but I knew what needed to be done. We thanked the Watcher and left the warehouse, our minds reeling from the enormity of what lay ahead. The drive to the facility was tense, every mile bringing us closer to the end game. I could feel the presence in my mind growing restless, as if it knew the time for confrontation was near. When we arrived, the building looked innocuous enough, a bland gray structure surrounded by a chain-link fence. But the air buzzed with an unnatural energy, and I could sense the power that lay hidden within. Mark and I snuck through a hole in the fence, creeping toward the building under the cover of darkness. We found an entrance at the back, a heavy steel door that opened with a creak. Inside, the halls were sterile and cold, fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare on everything. As we moved deeper into the facility, we encountered strange machines and vats filled with a shimmering substance that I recognized from my visions. It was the raw material for the pills, pulsating with a life of its own. Finally, we reached the heart of the facility, a chamber dominated by a massive pulsating monolith, identical to the one I'd seen in my visions. It thrummed with power, and I knew it was the source of everything. "This is it," Mark said, awe and fear mingling in his voice. "The heart of the beast." I stepped forward, my mind clear and focused. The presence inside me surged with anticipation, and I felt the Keeper's eyes watching from beyond the veil. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the last 2 pills, the final pieces of the puzzle. The Watcher had warned me that to destroy the monolith, I'd need to confront it with the truth. I swallowed both pills, feeling them dissolve in my throat, and braced myself for what was to come. The room around me dissolved, and I was once again standing in the void before the Keeper. Its eyes bore into me, and I felt its thoughts pressing against my mind. "You are ready," the Keeper intoned. "End the cycle and free yourself." With those words, I was back in the chamber, the monolith looming over me. I reached out, feeling the energy coursing through it. Memories flooded my mind, visions of countless lives, countless timelines that had been caught in the same cycle of despair. But I also saw hope, glimmers of light in the darkness. I realized that the Keeper wasn't just a guardian or a trickster. It was a catalyst, a guide to help me break free. I poured everything I had into the monolith, my fears, my hopes, my understanding of the truth. The structure trembled, cracks spreading across its surface. The air vibrated with a high-pitched hum, and the ground shook beneath my feet. There was a blinding flash of light, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the monolith was gone, reduced to a pile of dust. The facility was still and silent. The oppressive energy lifted. I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders, the presence in my mind finally at peace. Mark and I made our way out of the facility, the dawn breaking on the horizon. I knew that the pills, the visions, and the Keeper were all part of a journey that had finally come to an end. I was free, and the cycle was broken. As we drove away, I reflected on everything I'd experienced. The truth was a burden, but it had also been a gift. I'd seen the world in ways few ever would, and I knew that I would never be the same again. The Keeper's words echoed in my mind, a reminder of the path I had traveled and the lessons I'd learned. Everything was connected, and the choices I made would shape the future in ways I could only begin to understand. The journey was over, but the truth would always be with me, a testament to the power of knowledge and the strength to confront the unknown.